And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on the podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is Brian Solis, who is a principal analyst at Altimeter, which is the digital analyst group at Profit. He is a world-renowned author, a prominent blogger and writer, a keynote speaker. His latest book, Life Scale, is a little bit different than his previous books. It's focused on how to live a more creative, productive, and happy life. Brian's been at this for quite some time and is a bit of a rock star in the thought leader world. So welcome aboard today, Brian. Thanks for coming.
Wow, what an intro. Thank you.
Great. We can end now and just end on a high note.
Boom.
Thank you. Good night. So you've written several books. You've been keynoting for a long, long time. So I want to touch on that first in terms of what your core content has traditionally been. And then recently you made a fairly, radical pivot in terms of directionally with Life Scale, which, there's connections to obviously your personal life there. So just first tell us sort of traditional Brian and then sort of where it's gone, because it's kind of a cool story.
Sure. All right. Well, it's a long one. I'll keep it short though, because I've been at this since the 90s, and it was a love affair with Silicon Valley. I grew up as either wanting to be a musician or a developer. And so
Obviously.
yeah, those are the most two common choices people make or have to face.
Astronaut and fireman were taken.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I grew up in Los Angeles, so hence the musician part of it. And then ended up moving to Silicon Valley in the 90s, and really just found my niche, which was not something I set out to do, which was at the time in the 90s, Silicon Valley was all about enterprise technology, big hardware, software was coming up. And as the late 90s started to come around, of course, we had the rise of Internet 1.0
Yep.
and the bust, and then the rise of Web 2.0 and social media. And as the consumerization of technology, so we'll say hardware and also software and the internet, was coming about, I found that my niche was going to be in helping to explain the impact and the potential of technology in our lives. And if you put air quotes around our lives, that could mean us as employees, us as customers, us as parents, us as human beings.
Sure.
Because before that, tech was all about features and capabilities and speeds and feeds and automation and scale, and so it was talked about in a very inhuman way. So that's over the years, I found myself studying it and helping businesses make decisions. And ultimately, as time went on, I was also sort of became a digital anthropologist, which was to understand how societies and cultures and norms and values and behaviors were changing as a result of technology's involvement in our professional and personal lives as well.
Sure. And I would add that in the 90s, when this started, tech was mostly research, corporate, government. It wasn't anywhere near as permeated as it is today in the consumer, the individual's life, where if you can't find your cell phone for 5 minutes, it's, total panic mode, right? So that was more of a database, SQL, networking, sort of that stuff. And, the technology at home was a VCR blinking 12, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, yes, I do remember that, and having to still explain to my parents how to not just program a VCR, because they don't have one of those anymore, thank goodness. But anything related to tech, we've as children become the tech support.
Right. When they want to know if they've broken the Google, you've gotten that call. Yeah. There you go. So you've been a leader in that space for a long, long time, written a lot of books, done a lot of keynoting, and then came Life Scale, because this is a really fascinating story. So tell us how Life Scale came to be, and then I want to talk about how that has changed, or what has forced that to change the way you operate as an author and a thought leader in the business side of the house for you.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I should note is in my work, a big part of it was the advisory. So I would consult big companies, and then also, starting in the mid 90s, like say 96, 97, I was dramatically working with, and by dramatically, I mean shifting all of my time and attention to startups. And the reason I share that is because the irony of the story I'm about to tell is we'll hear it. So in helping startups, I was learning quite a bit. The thing about startups is that, unlike enterprise organizations where they have a lot of resources to throw at market development and business development, startups had to go from 0 to 100 overnight. And to get them to become not just startups, but bona fide businesses and deliver ROI to their investors, you couldn't follow the traditional rule books. And so a lot of that work wasn't just understanding and humanizing technology. A lot of my work was also understanding how to make markets.
Right.
And where I think I built my name wasn't just on the research and the books and all of that stuff. The sort of before all of that was sharing, blogging, writing about all of the strategies to make markets for a lot of startups. And I think that's where I think my name really started to circulate in the industry, which is what ultimately led to books and speaking and what have you. And
And I would say that was, if you think about blogging in the 90s, that was before we were using the term thought leadership and before, where blogging wasn't as rampant as it is today, right?
Yeah, well, in the 90s and the early 2000s, I remember using NetObjects Fusion as sort of building websites. It's sort of before weblogs and all of that stuff in the early 2000s. And it just sort of it just had a platform, to write and express your thoughts because other places wouldn't necessarily, they don't know who you are. So why would they publish you? And that's where I built, I cut my teeth, but also built my brand on that stuff. And
Yep.
ultimately that led to me consulting with, in the early 2000s, a lot of the rising social media stars. So social media became attached to my brand for a really, really long time because I was actively involved in not just advising startups, but also helping to cultivate the entire space. I was a big, big, big optimist for social media. I really felt it was going to democratize information, influence, connections. And here's where the irony comes in is that, after doing that for a good decade, and having a lot of success in helping companies grow,
Right.
and helping a lot of people sort of adopt and change their lives and become empowered with social media, I found myself radically affected by technology's impact in my own life, and that's the path that wasn't necessarily as much a pivot as much as it was a fracture or fissure in my work and thinking. In that, I had to get to the bottom of why.
So you can make an argument that because you were so good at the strategy and being able to see where it's going as an advisor and a consultant to these social media companies, you might not have been as poignant as seeing the potential downfall or negative side effect because there's lots and lots of good things about social, but not everything is great.
It's really well said. Right? And as an optimist, you maybe tend to look at things with blinders on. And so, for example, social media and Web 2.0 in general, there was some radical UX and UI innovations in the way that these apps and these networks were developing. You had the rise of mobile during this time.
Yep. Yep.
And so I would study UI and UX designs as a matter of learning how to communicate differently I knew brains were changing. I knew that we were becoming much more mobile. We were moving fast. And so I would take those design insights and for example, apply it to some of my previous books so that the book would emulate a mobile app and be much more
Sure.
intuitive and fun to read. What I didn't know, and this is where the last couple of years of my work had focused. What I didn't know is that behind that design was what's called persuasive design and a whole school of incredible psychological things that are employed to make those apps much more sticky, to make you want to share more, make you want to consume more. And so the difference was not the awakening, I should say, is that when I started to spend more time understanding what was going on with me, my inability to focus, my lack of creativity, my constant sense of busyness, my multitasking all over the place, just the lack or loss of depth and full blown critical thinking, a lot of that design was at the source of it, and that's where I decided to change or take a break from my normal work to pursue life scale because I had to fix my life.
Got it. So there's this weird intersection between optimizing UX and design from that perspective without having the understanding that we do today of the brain and dopamine and all that, right? Because it's that real intersection where some less than optimal things happen from social. So let's just real quickly just give us the overview on LifeScale, because I want to talk about how it's impacted the business side of you. So LifeScale is an outcome of some thinking and such that you've had on probably more on the personal side, right?
Yeah, it's actually just to be real honest, it's not a book that I set out to write. It's not like I said, "Hey, aha, I'm this is my next project." My next
Sure.
project was actually writing a follow up to my last book, X: The Experience When Business Meets Design, and that's where that's where. So there's two moments, right? When you have a life, when your life changes. One is the aha moment, which I thought this was the aha moment. I was gonna follow up X, and I was gonna make it more of a mainstream book so that I could kind of continue my path of growth and personal development. And then the other moment is right, and
Right.
that's the moment I actually hit, which was I couldn't get past the book proposal stage of that. I wasn't. I mean, I was writing. The ideas were there. I didn't think anything was wrong. But what was happening is that I was getting a lot of edits coming back. This isn't making sense. This isn't as clear as you had sort of explained it. And what I would find is as I would sit there and try to write it, I just my brain was not firing the way that it used to. And so I thought, oh well, it's got to be writer's block. It's got to be the pressure of all of these things.
Sure. Right.
And then I started to just notice in general patterns across all of my work, in my research writing, in my emails, the mistakes, the lack of clarity, things that you hear in your own inner monologue, but don't come across in any of the other work, even though you think it is.
So it's jumpy. It's not as focused.
Oh yeah.
You can tell it's the output of a distracted brain.
Yeah, exactly. And coming to that conclusion, as you put it, right? Like recognizing that it was a distracted brain took longer than you'd imagine, right? Because
Sure.
everything else is the problem. and
Well, and not only everything else, but everybody else
yes,
is doing it, right? So if you're the only sort of multitasker with 17 screens open and a phone in one hand and this in the other hand, then you're the odd man out. But this is sort of normalized now. I mean, nobody at Starbucks is making eye contact. They've get their heads down, doing whatever they're doing.
yeah, exactly. And so I still had to write that book, right? I mean, as you know, a lot of books are huge benefits to the world of speaking and advisory.
Yep.
Plus, I really care about still making markets and moving people in directions that are going to benefit
Yep.
them. So I was really moved to get that book out the door. But the more and more research that I started to do around that distracted brain really started to reveal like wow types of information and data that weren't actually in the mainstream media, weren't widely known by people who live a distracted life or who are constantly multitasking or busy.
So sort of an unreported epidemic,
Yep,
right? I mean,
absolutely. And so my passion shifted then to getting to the bottom of what was going on, and then more so doing something about it. And because I had access to a lot of the folks behind these big networks and apps, I got answers pretty quickly. What I didn't get pretty quickly was the antidote or the solution to this. And to be fair, persuasive design has been with us for a really long time,
sure.
and the in the social world and in the mobile world, what that means for people listening is that to get you to use the app more, to get our attention is a currency. So that's how they monetize these things, right? If they give it to you for free, they got to make money somehow. And so the more we use it, that's one thing, but the more we share on these platforms, that's the real data that gets them the insights.
That's the network effect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
network effect. And then of course the more you consume, then
Right.
then that's the ROI for their advertisers. So to
Yep.
do that, they have a lot of really interesting tricks to get you to use more and more and share more and more. But what they didn't realize though was the long-term effects of what that does. If you're constantly releasing dopamine, oxytocin, and all kinds of other chemical cocktails in your body, and because you get a like or because you get new followers, you're actually building behavior that over time starts to reveal or resemble an addicted format. And what that means is your body starts to crave those chemicals more and more, just like
Yep.
any kind of substance abuse. And so I don't think they.
Well, and with an addiction, you've got to raise the bar, right? So it's that one shot of tequila is not going to give you a buzz anymore. It's five, right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so that's what happened. So, as you said earlier, it became the new normal pretty quickly, and it continued to get worse and worse and worse, or better and better, better, depending on your point of view. But almost overnight, 10 years in the making, everybody was suddenly addicted without realizing they were addicted because it was just the new normal. And it wasn't just about how you use these apps and networks, it's also how it changes your behavior and everything else you do. Suddenly you're multitasking, suddenly you're doing all of these things, and you're just sort of skipping along the shallows rather than allowing yourself to go into the depths. It changed our dynamics of relationships and how we see
Yep.
things. I mean, just think about like dating apps today and how they've changed the whole sort of
Sure.
the world of what relationships look like. Everything changed: how we communicate, how we connect, how we think. Uh, all of that changed without us realizing it.
So on the change beat, I want to jump in there for a moment because here you are, world renowned for whatever 20 years on one side of tech, and now all of a sudden, not that you're throwing any of those things out the window, but you're basically looking at the world through a different lens and a different perspective that may not be as whatever flattering to the technology community as some of your earlier work. So as an author, as a thought leader, as a speaker, tell us a little bit how that transition, that transformation has happened, and how you're taking that content into some of the same places and some different places, but it's a very different message. And you talked about the book you were going to write. Well, that's the logical book to write. That's what your market wants. It would support your speaking. This was not that. And so talk about the business implications and this seems more mission driven than financial driven potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. Where this is a really interesting turn. When I started to do all of this research and kind of reveal how our brains and bodies were being rewired and what those impacts were, and I also had uncovered that those same types of design techniques were also behind things like fake news and bots, and really started to so for example 2 years ago I took all of that insight around what was happening to us as individuals, but also what was happening to us as a society with fake news and bots and why it was so believable, and I shared that as a keynote at South by Southwest. I think it was 2018. And so I still, as I was doing that research, I still wasn't on the path to life scale yet. I was just sharing all of this. I felt like somebody had to sound the
Yep.
alarm. And how the industry reacted to it was, wow, wow, but still not the kind of wow that would say, hey, this, we need you to do more and more and more of this. In fact, I would say that there was a bit of resistance to it in that no one wanted to poke the bear. No one wanted to say, oh, I have a problem. Everybody actually didn't want to accept that they had a problem with either their technology relationship or their relationship with information online.
Well, it's not as good for business.
It's exactly right. And it's also not good to, it's the same like with any addiction, right? Nobody wants to say that they have a problem. So at the end of that presentation, there were a few people that came up to kind of quietly talk about, hey, I've recognized that I do have this problem, and that I have been feeling anxious, and every time I go online, and what does your research show that we can do about it? And I
Right.
thought, well, I hadn't done that yet. I
Good
was
question.
I was great question. I was just so stoked about what was going on, and so impassioned to do something about it.
But you got confirmation that it's an issue, that it's a problem. So now the market could push back and say, yeah, maybe we don't want to talk about that. But then it seems like after a little bit of steeping, then they said, yeah, that kind of is a thing. Okay, big guy, what do we do about it? Right?
Yeah, exactly. So a couple things were happening at this time. One is a very well-known developer, Tristan Harris, who was his work was dedicated to then exposing a lot of these techniques and to also move the tech industry in a direction that was going to try to motivate next gen companies to think ethically about the design.
Okay.
So I felt confident then that if Tristan and others like him are pushing in this direction, then I needed to just get back to my next book. But also think about dedicating time to understanding how we solve the problem at a mainstream level.
And this is early, right? So what's interesting about this, where it parallels your earlier work, is you're early to the game, right? Because my thinking would be in 3 years from now, in 5 years from now, more people will be talking about this more often with more solutions, probably some tech solutions, because that's the way life goes, right? And you're early to the game as you were with social.
Well, yeah, and it seemed to be my track record has always been early to the game. So for better or for worse, right? I tend to develop markets and then move to the next thing just when the markets are becoming incredibly
Yeah, well, maybe
lucrative. So,
stay a little longer this time.
so true, so true. But just to continue on the honesty front, as all of this is happening, I still have my problems,
Sure.
right? I'm still distracted. I'm still multitasking. I'm still
Yep.
not able to get into the depths. And where I started to get from a philosophical point of view was I can't do anything. I can't answer these questions. I can't solve these problems. I can't make a bigger dent if I don't fix myself first. I started to do what anybody would do, which is Google solutions. And and of course the normal stuff comes up like mindfulness, yoga, meditation, digital detox.
Yep.
uh, and so I tried all of those things, apps like Calm and Headspace.
Yep.
uh, and look, they all work in their own way, but they were also treating the symptoms and not necessarily the problem. And I think philosophically, where I really started to think about things was, what does it mean to be alive today? What does it mean if we're not? I'm not realistically going to live a life without digital.
Of
I
course.
need it in my work, and so do a lot of people. So then what does it mean to be alive with these tools, not necessarily distractions? I think it was a choice. If I change how I look at them from distractions to tools, and then think about then how to rewire my brain and body in a way that was going to allow me to use these tools in ways that were not just positive but also productive and healthy and creative.
So let me just pause there, because there's one school of thought that sort of that just, well, go Amish, just turn it all off, which is just not realistic today, and to just not use these tools if you're going to be on the cutting edge and a productive member of the universe. I don't. My opinion is I don't think that's wise advice.
Yeah, well, it's a movement.
Yep.
Cal Newport has a book called Digital Minimalism,
Yep.
and there's also a movement that's called Essentialism.
Yep.
Look, to each his own.
Sure.
I believe, though, that especially living in Silicon Valley and being a digital analyst and anthropologist, digital was going to be a part of my life, and I was okay with accepting that. But what I needed to do and what didn't exist or what I couldn't find was how to rewire your brain if it's been rewired in this direction, and if you're inducing all of these chemicals in your body that do these things that you crave in microdoses, then how do you do that in ways that push you, that do it where you're
Right.
happy and
Right.
productive and creative, right? And so that's the life scale journey. So still at this point, it wasn't a book; it was my way of fixing my
Yep.
life. And I went through these steps. I found what didn't work. I found what was working and what was pushing me little by little, and then bigger and bigger, and then deeper and deeper. And so I documented these steps, went through the whole process myself, and really started to feel good and great, and started to notice my work was getting better and more creative and coming alive again. So that's when I thought back to South by Southwest, and like everybody asking, what do you do about it? What can we do about it? And realizing that if I have this problem and there aren't a lot of answers out there, then maybe this should be my next book. And I called the
Yep.
publisher, Wiley, and kind of just asked them if they would be open to supporting a very different book from a person who has no authority or audience.
In this space at all. Right. Just the call they were hoping to get from you.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
were,
Yeah, let's.
golly gee, we're so glad you called with that, Brian. And when's your next diet book coming out? Right.
Oh, that's so good, and probably what they were thinking in the back of their mind. And instead, my friend over there, who I've worked
Yep.
with for I think 4 books, maybe 5 books, she was right on board, and we started right away on it, and that became
Yeah.
LifeScale, and it's been
Here we
life
are.
changing ever since.
So let's, as we start to sort of land the plane here, this was a little bit of a different conversation today because it was about, someone that's been incredibly successful and then sort of pivoting a little bit and just going with it because it felt like the right thing to do. Probably is the right thing to do, and then it's going to take you, and who knows directionally where that's going to take you. Any thoughts, advice, recommendations, scoldings, whatever, just to folks that are out there that have achieved a level of success with their core brand and their thought leadership and their content, that are feeling like they want to sort of pivot a little bit? Like, someone that's in that similar situation you at South by 2 years ago.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer this in two ways. One is that the pivot, or just developing a new market or building a new brand, has been incredibly different and incredibly difficult than, say, the evolution of where I came from the 90s and early 2000s, right? This has been a profound learning experience in what it takes to build a brand in today's environment, right? Everything we talked about in terms of being distracted and multitasking,
Yep.
and also today's news cycles and how crazy they are, right? It is incredibly difficult to get mind space now, and so that I say because if you're thinking about a pivot, you now also have to consider how big do you want that pivot to be. If it's for yourself, right? So LifeScale helped me personally, but I felt that I also wanted to help people like me. And so I made the conscious decision to start all over again, knowing that it was going to be a massive challenge. And I did it because I was really passionate about helping other people. So for those who are thinking about that pivot or pursuing something that they're passionate about, or that idea that they've been maybe pushing down for far too long, you also have to ask yourself and be real with yourself, how big do you want that pivot to be?
And how quickly?
Yeah, and how quickly, right? Because what I grossly underestimated is what it would take to even get any kind of mind share around the topic. And that if I had to go back and make that decision again, I would probably make other decisions about carving out more space for it. The other thing to consider is, do you plan on monetizing that pivot? Because that's also going to change how you approach the entire endeavor. So again, on the honesty front, I did not go into this space thinking I was going to monetize the LifeScale movement. But now, in hindsight, and also where I am at this crossroads, I should have done that earlier. And now I need to, in that, because of the amount of energy it's taking to get, it's like the joke along the way is, how do you sell a book about being distracted to people who don't recognize that they're distracted? So the level of missionary marketing that has to go into that at the front end is incredible.
Exactly.
So now I'm thinking about this, the monetization and the scale, so that I can help people at with greater effect. So you got to think about that earlier
and do well and do good. And it's never too early to think about the strategy around leveraging and monetizing it, even if it might not be the intent. It's worth going through that thinking, because if I were to say, hey, Brian, would it have made sense to force yourself to think about the strategic monetization piece of this 18 months ago, even if your headspace wasn't there? It probably would have been a good activity for you to force yourself to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been awesome. I can't thank you enough. This has been really, really interesting, and I wish you only the best with LifeScale and wherever else you're going to go with your content in the future. So thanks so much for being so transparent today. Thank you.
Peter, thank you so much.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.